In this video, we continue our study of factoring by looking at Principle 2. Try grouping terms looking for common factors. So in our previous video, we looked at how to factor out common factors, and this time we're going to have many terms and the common factors aren't obvious until after we group them. The principle of grouping is something that we try to do, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. When there's an even number of terms, sometimes we're lucky and can group pairs of terms. And as we did with our earlier examples, whenever there's subtraction, we need to think of it as addition. In this first example, I look at that and I have 4 terms. And what we're going to do is we're going to group this into 2 pairs. And the pairing that we're going to do, we'll just try the pairing that it starts with. So we've got our first 2 terms and our second 2 terms. If this was a minus sign in the middle, it's really important that I should have changed it to plus so that I could factor out the negatives. This strategy is really about summation. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at each pair and decide if it has common factors in itself. So I look at this first term, the pair of terms, and I have 2x cubed minus 4x squared y, and I can see that that has a common factor of 2 and x squared. So the first 2 terms have a common factor 2x squared, and when I factor that out, the 2x cubed leaves a factor of x, and the second term, minus 4x squared y, leaves a common factor of negative 2y. Now we're going to focus on the second pair, and let's see what we get. So I've got 3x minus 6y. The 3 and the 6 I can see have a common factor of 3. That's it. So let's see what we get. So I get plus 3, it's a common factor, and I'm left with x minus 2y. The idea of grouping is after you do this common factor of pairs, you might be lucky and discover that the factor that you're left with is common. So notice the 2x squared and the 3, that was not common, but the x minus 2y is. So now it's a common factor, and I can factor it out. I have x minus 2y was a common factor, and from the first term, which came from my original first pair, the other factor was 2x squared. And from my second term, which came from my second pair, the other factor was 3. So now this is my factored version of the problem. Alright, so let's look at a second example. Notice that this time I do have that negative sign. I'm going to have to think about how I do this so that I get an addition. Let's write it out. I have this is going to be a sum of 2 pairs. And the first pair is 2x squared minus 5x. And I want to think of this as addition. And I've got minus 4x plus 10. Alright. So let's see what common factors we can find. In our first pairing, 2 and 5, no common factor, but x squared and x has a common factor of x. So let's factor that out. I have x leaving 2x minus 5. Now, if this is going to work, when I factor this second pair, negative 4x plus 10, I should either get an x or a 2x minus 5. So this leading term, negative 4x, I'm going to want to factor out in negative 2 so that I can be left with my x. And negative 2, it's not what we normally think of as a factor of 10, but it is. So I didn't mean to do that. Plus, we're going to factor the negative 2 out, leaving for negative 4x, we have a factor of positive 2x. And for the 10, I have a factor of negative 5. So if I were to distribute this negative 2 over to these other terms, I should recover negative 4x plus 10. Great. We can see that I have a common factor. And now that it's a common factor, I go back to principle 1 and I can finish. I didn't mean to be red, I want it to be blue. So my common factor, 2x minus 5, in the first term, the remaining factor was x. In the second factor, the remaining piece is negative 2. And so I have it factored. 2x minus 5 times x minus 2. So grouping's not guaranteed to work, but when it does, we can use the principle of factoring by common factors if I can find a common factor through the groups.